As we know, water and energy are linked. You wouldn't be on this webinar if you didn't already know this. So I'm not going to spend any time really discussing that linkage. We had done that in prior webinars where we talked about the need for better coordination between water and energy programs. We know that water is needed for energy. In the latest report that was issued by the U.S. Geological Survey in 2005, 49% of all freshwater withdrawals, daily water usage, go to power plant cooling. That's nearly half of the nation's resources, water resources, that are needed for thermoelectric power plant cooling. At the same time, we know that energy is needed for water supply and wastewater systems. And this is a now very famous, iconic chart that was published in 2005 by the California Energy Commission that documents all the different places in the water supply and wastewater cycle where energy is needed to pump, treat, move water, and also to be used by the end-use consumer, who is represented in this graph by that orange box. So water is needed for energy, energy is needed for water. And our view at the Alliance for Water Efficiency is that there needs to be a lot more collaborative work between these two resource areas. We have always historically been separate but parallel in our efficiency efforts, and we are committed to improving that and to changing that so that we do more joint management of these issues. And that's the fundamental topic of this webinar. How do we jointly manage water and energy for maximal, optimal benefit for both? Our partner in this project all along has been ACEEE, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. And our very first project that we did together with ACEEE was called a Blueprint for Action. It was a stakeholder-based process where we inventoried all of the needed research, program, and policy areas in the water energy nexus that decision makers and funders would need answers to in order to progressively move this issue forward. The report is posted on our website. We did a webinar on it last year, and we did a subsequent webinar on water and energy research this year. But this particular webinar addresses the major theme of best practice programs. The blueprint had an entire theme area that talked about the need to inventory what were the best practices that we saw out there in both water and energy and combined water and energy efficiency, and how do we help our utilities out there learn from and replicate these programs. So that's the segue into the webinar today, and our first speaker will be Rachel Young from ACEEE, who will talk about that project that we initiated with the Blueprint, and she will talk to us about the exemplary utility programs that save water and energy together.
Thanks, Marianne. That was a fantastic introduction to the work that we've been doing together. Like Marianne said, my name is Rachel Young. I work for the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, and I'm going to talk to you about some of our work examining programs that save both water and energy. Next slide. So ACEEE is a nonprofit organization, and we work to advance energy efficiency policies and programs. And we focus across the economy in industry, buildings, utilities, transportation, and we also do economic analyses, and we analyze behavior programs, and we look at national, state, and local policy and how energy efficiency can fit into those policies and programs. And we can reduce our energy intensity across the country. And we've begun our partnership with AWE a couple of years ago, and I've personally been very excited about the opportunity to work on the water energy nexus. And like Marianne said, our first venture into this was to lay out this blueprint, and then from that blueprint we created an exemplary programs award and report, and we gathered nominations from programs across the country and in Canada and Australia to find out what's really going on out there and which programs are really doing great work to save water and energy. Next slide. And I wanted to focus in on some of the opportunities for water and energy utilities to work together. We think that there are numerous benefits for our two utilities to collaborate to achieve greater savings. We recently published a report that sort of lays out this argument for why it's great and what are some of the opportunities. So I just wanted to make that case up front for you guys. We believe that you can get increased market penetration of energy efficiency programs if we have water and energy utilities working together. More utilities out there with different relationships with their customers can knock on doors, can share resources, and really help increase the amount of efficiency that we can get. In addition, working together can reduce the number of times that customers have to hear from these utilities. We've heard from a couple of different programs that their customers can get not annoyed, but at least more convenience when their utilities are working together to coordinate, to do joint audits, and to improve efficiency all together at the same time. And also, utilities have different relationships with manufacturers and retailers, and so running programs together can help take advantage of some of those different opportunities and some of those different relationships to help get some of that water and energy efficiency market penetration. Next slide, please. In addition, we see that we can achieve even greater water and energy efficiency when the two utilities come together and start planning together and thinking about agendas and sort of just identify some of those opportunities that are out there. And we also think that there are benefits to just increasing energy and water efficiency because as the utilities work together, we learn more about what's going on in these programs. We learn more about how to track the savings benefits and meter and evaluating some of those opportunities. And so it really helps to not only bolster the programs themselves, but the sort of broader knowledge across the country and help assist some new and other programs. In addition, you can get increased cost effectiveness from joint energy and water efficiency when you start considering some of those additional benefits. Next slide, please. So what we did is we solicited a bunch of different nominations from different programs that are out there that are saving water and energy, not necessarily just water and energy utility partnerships, but just programs in general that are saving water and energy at the end use. And we came up with these 5 exemplary programs that won the award, and then we also had a series of promising programs, some programs that were still a little bit new, and we wanted to keep an eye on them, but we're still really doing really great work. Those I don't have a slide for, but you can see more details about the promising programs in our report. So the winning programs were from Boulder, Colorado, their energy performance contracting program. They partnered with an EPC to help finance some of their efficiency programs, and they were able to achieve some pretty substantial savings. Darden Restaurants had a 15 by 15 goal, so they committed to save 15% of energy and water by 2015 across all of their restaurants. So the Darden Restaurants own several different chains, and they were able to pretty cost-effectively achieve some pretty substantial savings. Massachusetts Water Resource Authority, MWRA, had a long-term sustainability program, and they focused on 4 different components of water and energy efficiency, including some serious conservation efforts, and they were able to cost-effectively reduce energy and water savings, and they saw some pretty substantial improvements. Southern California Edison had a leak pilot detection program, and I'm going to talk about them in a little bit more detail because this was one program that was a genuine utility, water and energy utility partnership. And then lastly, United Technologies Corporation, UTC, had a 2015 sustainability goals, and so across all their facilities, they committed to reducing water and energy consumption, and as well as CO2. And they were able to achieve some great savings. And both UTC and Darden are some pretty good examples of how the private sector is really forging the path to greater savings for water and energy, and they were doing a lot of work on their own outside of mandates, and they're achieving really cost-effective savings. Next slide, please. So I wanted to go into a little bit more detail on 2 programs that were highlighted in our exemplary programs report that really were genuine partnerships between water and energy utilities. So the Southern California Edison Leak Detection Pilot Program was one of our exemplary program winners, and their program is born out of a mandate from the California PUC, Energy Water Guidance, which said that energy IOUs, or investor-owned utilities, needed to conduct water and energy pilots together with their water agencies in their service areas. And they did a whole suite of different programs in the in 2008 and 2009 timeframe, and they did some that focused on landscaping and improving water appliances, toilets, all sorts of different programs. But the Southern California Edison leak pilot detection program was one of their most successful programs. And if you want to see the full report of the CPUC, there's a link below. Next slide, please. The leak pilot detection program was a partnership between the Southern California Edison and 3 different water utilities, and their aim was to identify some of the errors in metering and some consumption issues in these water agencies and detect where there might have been leaks in order to repair those leaks and to not only reduce wasted water, but also to reduce the amount of energy that's needed to pump that water. Southern California is a relatively water-poor area, as I'm sure most of you know, and they have high energy demands and high costs to convey a lot of that water to the end users. So there's a substantial amount of energy and cost savings that could have been achieved from identifying these leaks and repairing them. So they selected 3 different water partners, and they were selected because of their relative size, and they was pretty manageable. And they implemented, or Southern California Edison implemented some performance, and they identified where some of those leaks were, and then they had a contractor come in and help achieve some of those savings. And they generated some pretty high savings from what we saw, and they were able to achieve about 170 miles of distribution lines that were identified where the leaks were, and they were treated, which resulted in 178,000 kilowatt hours a year of energy savings and 81 million gallons a year of water savings. And the CPUC in their evaluation said that the leak pilot detection program was one of their most cost-effective and highest energy-saving pilot programs. Next slide, please. Of course, there are several lessons to be learned from all of the programs that we examined. Specifically for the Southern California Edison's program, they saw that they were very easily able to engage with the agency staffs because Southern California Edison's project manager already had a very strong relationship with the water agencies, and they were already very comfortable with one another, which just sort of emphasizes the need for water and energy utilities to work together so that we can overcome some of those initial relationship building hurdles that may occur. Unfortunately for this program, those were not the case. They also had some issues getting some of the necessary data. ACEEE really is committed to verifying that they were going to get these large savings, and so one of their challenges was that they didn't all have the same methodology when calculating water and energy savings. All the different agencies didn't have the same methodology. And they're very committed to continuing to do something similar to this. They're very interested in using low-cost screening methods and incorporating some different field visits to help verify some of those savings. And this program was administered in 2008 and 2009. And I believe that they're particularly interested in extending this one because it was so cost-effective. Next slide, please. The other program that I wanted to talk to you about was one of our promising programs, Austin's Multifamily Energy and Water Efficiency Program, which was also a joint water and energy utility run program. It was spurred by a DOE grant that Austin Energy and Water received, which specifically encouraged them to do some deep dives into energy efficiency upgrades in multifamily buildings, particularly for low-income housing. In addition, they had this other benefit where the City of Austin's Energy Conservation and Disclosure Ordinance was mandating that they increase the performance of some of these multifamily properties, and this project was both stimulated by the DOE grant but also helped them meet that compliance requirement. And if you want to learn some more directly from Austin, there's a link to their website on this slide, but there also is a write-up in our report. Next slide, please. The objective of the program was to save water and energy and their associated costs for multifamily housing and to help overcome some of those split incentive barriers that exist. And they really were focused on trying to improve water and energy efficiency for low-income residents. As we know, low-income residents tend to have a disproportionate percentage of their income goes to their bills, and so efficiency is particularly helpful for them. And they did this by bundling up their incentives, their water, energy, and gas incentives, and they were able to make a more attractive program for folks, and that also makes it just simpler for their customers. They can only go to one place, and they can see where all of the energy and water rebates that are available to them are. And the Austin Water Utility, Austin Energy, and Texas Gas Service all had different responsibilities. Particularly Austin Energy was there to do some quality control work, and they evaluated in the beginning and at the end of the process to make sure that they got some of the savings that they committed to get. And the program was quite successful, we thought, although it was relatively new when when this report was published. But they did have 871 participants, and they installed about 250 shower heads, kitchen aerators, bathroom aerators, and they were able to achieve some substantial savings. And again, I mean, this is just a really great example of how utilities can partner together and to create really effective programs. Next slide, please. The last thing I wanted to talk to you guys about was the lessons learned from that program. The Austin City had a particular legal constraint that they had to overcome when they were administering their program, which caused a gap in their efficiency programs, and so a lot of their staff had to be relocated, and they had to overcome some staffing and resource issues because of that gap in time at the administering of their program. But a lot of that was able to be overcome by outsourcing some of their weatherization and HVAC work to some evaluators and inspectors that were not working directly with the utilities. In addition, I mean, it's always difficult for utilities to overcome some of the legal barriers that may be in place, and particularly establishing those relationships. And so that in order to ensure some effective coordination, they established a memorandum of understanding in order to lay out what the roles were for each utility and how they were going to achieve their savings. And lastly, I wanted to point you to our Water Energy Program Directory that we worked on in partnership with AWE. This webpage shows the front of our program directory, and we have about 450 different water and energy saving programs highlighted in this directory. And a lot of them have contact information for the folks that were administering the programs, and I highly encourage you all, if you have a program that you're working on and you want to share that information, to please go to our directory and input your program and what you're working on. Or if you're just looking for some examples, this is a good resource. And last slide is just my contact information if you want to get a hold of me, where to download our exemplary program support, and a link again to our Water Energy Program Directory. And thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Rachel. Jeffrey, did we receive any questions for Rachel?
There are no questions.
Well, if you have questions about the programs that are listed in the directory or that were evaluated as part of this exemplary programs project, and you think of them during the webinar, please type them in, and we will be taking questions near the end. So at this point, I'd like to move on to our next speaker, who is Amelia Newting from Western Resource Advocates, and she's going to be talking to us about a report that Western Resource Advocates issued called Conservation Synergy, the Case for Integrating Water and Energy Efficiency Programs.
Thanks, Marianne. I'm Amelia Newting. I'm a water energy analyst at Western Resource Advocates, and Western Resource Advocates is a nonprofit conservation organization. We're based in Boulder, Colorado, but we work throughout the entire Mountain West. So we recently released a report called Conservation Synergy, and I'm going to talk about the reasons for and the pathways by which water and energy utilities can collaborate on their efficiency programs. So this includes electricity, gas, and water utilities, and what we're really focused on in this report are end-user programs that would be delivered to shared customers in shared service territory of these collaborating utilities. And more specifically, actually, can you go back a slide? I'm focused on hot water programs. These are programs that are already offered by energy and water utilities, and so are pretty easily collaborated on. So I saw a handful of examples of collaborating utilities. Some of them came to me through the ACEEE report that Rachel just talked to you about. I've also seen some examples in California, and there was a report in the 90s that documented some collaborations by Cindy Dybala. And it occurred to me that this was definitely not the norm, but this certainly seemed like a good business opportunity if you think about it. And so I was curious why more utilities aren't doing this, and if there are good reasons to be doing it and to pursue it, or if there are a lot of barriers and reasons why utilities aren't already doing it. So I set about and did a bit of research. I set up interviews with both collaborating utilities and non-collaborating utilities to get their perspectives, and energy efficiency and water efficiency experts as well. And by and large, the overwhelming majority said that yes, collaboration seems like a good idea. We should try it out if they're not already, and those utilities that had collaborated indicate that they certainly want to continue doing so. So out of those interviews that I did, I had a few conclusions. One, I came up with a few different types of programs that are most likely readily collaborated, or what's the right word, easily collaborated upon by utilities. And there are three kinds: joint rebates, joint audits, and joint building efficiency upgrades. Secondly, I came up with sort of a guideline to the collaborative process, a little bit of a how-to and some of the things that utilities should be aware of as they go into this collaboration. And lastly, I sort of sorted out some of the benefits and some of the challenges with collaboration. So I'll go through the first three types of collaborations that are readily available to most utilities. The first is a joint rebate. A good example of this is the collaboration between Pacific Gas and Electric and 41 water agencies. I think it's probably 29 water utilities, and then the other numbers come from sub-agencies, wholesalers, and retailers. So basically, they collaborate on a washing machine rebate and provide a $100 to $125 rebate. $50 of it comes from PG&E, and the rest of it comes from the water utility. PG&E started this program initially by themselves, and then in 2008 started adding water utilities. As a result of that partnership, there was a very large increase in participation, about 63%. It consistently ranks highest in customer satisfaction, and they have found that their administrative costs are lower. The link to their program website is on the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. The next type of collaboration available is a joint audit. And the example that I use is actually the same example from Rachel's report. It's Austin Water, Energy, and Texas Gas. So I won't go into details since she did a great job reviewing that. I'll just say two things. This is what we can call a tri-resource program because it involves all three electricity, gas, and water utilities. And also this collaboration was so successful that they're thinking of expanding to the hospital and school sector as well. Next slide, please. The last type of program that utilities can readily collaborate on are joint building efficiency upgrades. A good example of this is the collaboration between Southern California Gas and the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. They established not one, but 6 building efficiency programs, and these are basically retro commissioning, upgrade programs, and design assistance programs. The reason why they have so many is because some of these programs were already in place. So for example, Southern California Gas already had one of these programs, and as Marianne likes to say, they just added water, or maybe electricity. So they were listening. So each utility took a lead on a program that was already in place, and the reverse is true for LADWP. This was launched in late 2012, and they hammered out a legal framework in a very short time, in just 6 months. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about the collaborative process guideline, and this was distilled from my interviews with people about things that they thought were important and sort of the basic steps that they took to establish a partnership. So I heard from several people that getting commitment from top management was key to the success of a partnership being established and in a timely manner. And indeed, that was the case for having a 6-month agreement between LADWP and SoCalGas. In addition, it's important to confer with your regulatory bodies. Sometimes there'll be no problem, whether it's a city council or a board or a PUC, but other utilities work in different climates, and that may prove to be difficult, or at least really important to include them from the beginning. Next slide, please. The second step is really the meat of the collaboration. So I begin with saying preparing the market analysis. Really that means taking a look at what efficiency programs have been implemented in the past, where are the utilities looking to in the future, which sectors are in greatest need. Perhaps you feel like you've tapped the residential sector pretty well, but the commercial sector is tough. So that would be a good potential collaboration for all utilities. To do that, you're going to need to have basically your efficiency program managers and anyone who's sort of aware of the future direction of where these utilities are headed in the room to talk about that. And you can identify the best first collaborative opportunities. And I recommend starting pretty easy, because to get this first one running takes a lot of work at the outset to get it established. Is there an existing program you can just add water to or add energy to? Or would a new program be more appropriate, some sort of rebate audit or building efficiency program? Certainly there are other types of programs that may be available to in any given partnership. Every utility needs to look at the costs and benefits of a program and perhaps even assess some financing options. So here in the report, I go into some detail about some of the differences between the environments in which water utilities operate and energy utilities operate, and even the differences between state-regulated and sort of municipally run utilities. It's important to be aware of those differences because the needs and expectations can be very different when you're talking about data that you need to show or the amount of finances that you're allowed to allocate to a certain program. For this, you might also need to include your financial staff because you're going to be establishing new processes for transferring finances as well as data and information. And lastly, you'll define the roles and responsibilities, who does what, how, and when, and what are sort of the safety options. This can often be addressed through an MOU, as Rachel mentioned, or some sort of inter-utility agreement. And this is actually where the lawyers would come in too, but not till the very end. One example you might want to look to can be found in a report that was recently released by the Pacific Institute. I think the report is called Water and Energy Synergy, and they took a sort of detailed look at what are some of the barriers in California to inter-utility collaboration. And in the appendix, they include an example of the inter-utility agreement established by LADWP and SoCalGas. So that can be informative if you're interested in looking at that. And at this time, I'd also like to give a shout out to the ACEEE report that was recently released, Helping Utilities Build Better Programs, which also talks about the ways in which utilities can collaborate. And I think that the fact that all three of these reports came out right around the same time in the last couple of months really highlights the importance and the timeliness of this issue. Next slide, please. The third step is basically do the program, implement it, and evaluate how it goes so that you can improve it and refine it for the next time. And lastly, the fourth step is to sort of think out of the box a little. Next time when you go and want to work with a utility on some program, what can you do that's going to be a little bit beyond sort of the simple rebate or audit that you initially collaborated on? Maybe you're going to try to tackle a tougher nut that would be a lot easier to crack with the help of another utility. Maybe you can address a cold water and energy efficiency program, like the water loss detection and repair program that Rachel talked about, or some irrigation program. That's really getting at the embedded energy in water, so it's not quite as easy to calculate, and I think a lot of states would probably, and utilities would struggle with that, but we know California is working on it. So we're all certainly looking to California to see how that goes. Next slide, please. There were several benefits identified that resulted from collaboration. Higher participation rates and broader promotion from jointly promoting these programs was a big one. Lower costs were realized, at least by Pacific Gas and Electric. The other programs were a little too early to really have all the costs measured out. But increased customer satisfaction was a big one. Either they're getting a bigger rebate, or they might just be happy that they're seeing their utilities working smarter and not harder. Complementary and coordinated program design is an important one because that way you won't wind up with some device that's rebated that has great energy savings but maybe subpar water savings. And lastly, long-term collaborative opportunities are very important because I really think if you start small, you can build bigger as time goes on. Next slide. There are also, of course, some challenges, all of which can be overcome. The first one is a significant upfront time investment. There's really no way around this. It just takes time to establish all the informational sharing and transfer of finances. But once that's established, it's going to be a lot easier should you choose to collaborate again on some program in the future. There are also differences in service territory. Very rarely does the entire service territory of an energy utility overlap with a water utility. So these programs will not be available to all customers, so you will have to navigate that. There are some very real differences in data collection protocol and expectations, so it's really important to be clear about that up front. Water and energy utilities work in very different regulatory environments sometimes, and so just being clear and expressing this to the other utility about what sorts of data and other metrics you need will really help the process to run more smoothly. Establishment of trust was one that was identified in the ACEEE report as one that just sort of took some time, but I think that that can be soothed a bit by those types of legal agreements. And lastly, regulatory bodies, they can help or hurt. It kind of depends on the personality of whatever decision-making body utilities are working with. Next slide, please. So if you're eager to get started on a collaboration and you're going to consider maybe a rebate, an audit, or an efficiency program, one way to get started is with this brochure. This brochure tells your customers how they will save energy when they save water. This particular image is focused on a residential brochure, but WRA has also designed a template commercial brochure. So what we do is we work with utilities to put their logo and program information on these brochures, and utilities can send these out. This is sort of a quick and easy way to start getting the message out. And if you want to make it a joint program, you can put both utilities' logos on this brochure. This is available at no charge to utilities that are in the states that we work, which are Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, and Wyoming. And if you're outside our state and you're interested in it, get in touch with me and we'll see what we can do. Next slide, please. This is just the last slide. I've got my contact info, and the link at the bottom is where you can download the full report and the executive summary, and you can also check out those energy water brochures that we have available. Thanks very much. It was great to be a part of this today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Amelia. That was a great presentation. Jeffrey, did we have any questions for Amelia that came in during the course of her talk?
No questions.
Okay. I know we are assembling some questions. We did get one for Rachel, which we'll answer a little bit later. But let's go ahead and move on then and go to our next speaker. We just heard the first two speakers covered some excellent reports that were summarizing the state of water and energy partnerships. And now we'll switch and go to the utility perspective and hear from two water utilities, one on the West Coast and one on the East Coast, who are thinking about that water and energy connection and are incorporating that water and energy connection in all of their planning for water efficiency and conservation programs. So our first speaker is Charles Bolig, who is with East Bay Municipal Utility District in Oakland, and I'd like to turn it over to Charles.
Thank you, Marianne. I'm going to kind of go through kind of a little bit of our process on how we go to determining rebates, partnering up with our local utility kind of trends, getting into a little bit of the data on cost effectiveness. And so for those of you that aren't familiar with East Bay MUD, we are, of course, the Marianne's the West Coast, and here in California, we move water a long distance. And you can see this slide here. You can see the little, the top right-hand side, a gray area. That's the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. Little green dots in the center are reservoirs, and then we've got an aqueduct, so we move water 90 miles into our service area. The pink there is our Bay Delta, which is a pretty important ecosystem for the area, as well as a big water transfer from Northern California down to Southern California. And then we drop into our service area. So East Bay Mud is considered a rather larger wholesaler, retailer. And we do have a good customer base of about 1.4 million. And so we do, our utility that we are within is all PG&E. For those other water utilities out there, I know here in the West Coast, our water deliveries have been down for quite a few years. And in my little blue box, that third bullet down, typically we've been delivering around 210 MGD, and we're down to about 165. This year might be up a little bit higher because we didn't have any rain since January in our service area. But I thought it'd be, like, say, curious to know how other water utilities are doing nationwide. Go to the next one, Marianne. So on this next slide, I'm going to be talking about water rates and wastewater rates throughout the United States. And it's also is directly affected on in East Bay Mud. And part of the reason why I do this is if I'm going to ask a customer to put together some capital to upgrade like an existing device, or when they're at point of purchase, go for something higher efficiency, I want to do like paybacks, return on investments for them, because of course we're not able to finance the entire project for them, just a small portion of it. So this particular graph comes from Reptilis, and they work for they're a firm that works for the American Water Works Association. I know it's a very noisy graph, but a couple things I just want to point out. The green on it is the consumer price index, essentially the rate of inflation. Then the blue and the red as water and wastewater. So Reptilis takes a survey every 2 years, and so if you look at the center of the presentation, you see the 12.1, and that's in the red bullet in the center, or I guess on the number line. And that's essentially saying that within those 2-year periods, the wastewater agencies, all of them that they surveyed, had an average of 6% increase per year. So as you can see, this graph shows is that the cost of water and wastewater are continually increasing year in, year out at a much greater clip than consumer price index. A lot of that has to do with that I think AWWA came out with their first number saying that the infrastructure for water in the United States of America is like $1 trillion that it needs, and I heard recently that the number's up to $3 trillion for all these pipes that are in the ground that are at the end of their lifespan. There's greater regulation involved in how water is delivered to your customers, and then when we discharge it into whether it's a river, stream, an ocean, whatever it may be. So this is good news when you're working with customers and working with the energy provider, is that the return on investment for that customer is going to only get better and better. Next slide, Marianne. Follow that is going to be, I'm going to talk about the cost of electricity in California. Once again, it's another, kind of good story that efficiency, water and energy is a good decision for that customer. So you can see here, over just the last 5 years, PG&E, Pacific Gas Electric Company, has been about a 3% increase all the time. So I remember when I first started in this, it was around a dime, and you can see in some of the higher tiers now, the TOU means time of use on the little legend on the graph. So it's continually increasing, and it probably will be for quite some time. Next graph. Talk about natural gas. A lot of people here in California use natural gas for their heating, but also for their water heating. It's very strong there. So that one's been pretty flat, and that's a lot to do with a lot more natural gas coming on the systems here in California. I think it's kind of a national trend also. So next slide, Marianne. So the next one is when we start to kind of glue some of these costs together for the customers. So here's a kind of a smattering from California, and it's showing the trend of water and wastewater each and every year increasing in its cost. Now, note that water is still, shockingly cheap. I think our bottom tier is $2.62 for 748 gallons delivered to your home or business, so it's still a pretty dang good deal. But you can see it is increasing. A lot of this sometimes is also on the demand on the sewer. This particular example is for commercial food service, and since they have a lot of fats, oil, and greases in their wastewater stream, it costs a bit more. Next one, Miriam. So this one is a study that East Bay Mud did with PG&E and a whole host of other ones. So this is back like in 2005. Kind of what I want to show from here is that, of course, there's a lot of energy involved in the supply, conveyance, treatment, distribution, and the wastewater. It's still relatively cheap. I know East Bay Mud, we are a gravity-fed system. The majority of the way, all of our water actually makes it from the foothills of the Sierra into the East Bay in the San Francisco Bay Area is a gravity system. And then all of our reservoirs are up on the hills, and so we pump and fill during the nighttime when the energy is the cheapest, and then let gravity fill up our pressure zones. But that number that came up on the screen, that 2.6 watts per gallon, that is looking at the supply, conveyance, treatment, the whole kit and caboodle together. And so that is still, unfortunately, pretty reasonable. And just kind of a little, our wastewater group here is actually, we have methane generators now, so that wastewater number that I have highlighted there, 472, is actually down to 0 now. Next slide. So now I'm going to start talking a little bit about some of the things that we've done with our local energy provider. And some of the first work I know I got started on was the pre-rinse spray valve. I was actually working with PG&E at the time, and my boss, Richard Harris, that I'm sure many of you know, called over and said, hey, what kind of savings are in commercial food service? So this started back in 1999, so we came up with that. And that actually turned out to be, took kind of the nation by storm, a very simple, device that was wonderful because it saved that, the energy for heating the water, and then, of course, the water, and then the wastewater. We've done a lot of research with our local energy provider, as I mentioned, PG&E. We've done food steamers because, of course, steaming food involves water, and there can be a lot of water wasted on that, especially when you're trying to put steam down the sanitation drain and you have to chase it with cold water just to make sure you don't get too much of a little buildup of things growing in there. Ice machines, not as big a target as we'd hoped in California because we've been pretty water savvy for years, and so there are water-cooled machines out there in California, but not as many as we initially thought, but nationwide there's still a pretty big target because once again, instead of having on an ice machine a fan taking the heat away to make the ice, they use water to do it. East Bay Mud, we work together to provide training for the energy utility representatives, and so we have participate in a full-day class twice a year to go to PG&E and talk to the representatives, things that they see out there, and talk about how we can combine efforts. And we also have a grant awarded, and it's specifically to partner up with our local utility for commercial food service, which is commercial food services, some of you know, is very energy and water intensive. Next slide, please. So then following one is kind of a little talked about already, was the clothes washer program. And East Bay Mud actually started back in 1995 with a small partnership with PG&E. And that first year we had 52 rebates. So we were kind of excited just to have 52. Funny how it goes, we now have between 8,000 and 10,000 a year. And one of the things that was mentioned by the previous speaker was, these regional programs are fantastic for the end user because I know personally myself, I go shopping in a different water district at the local big box store. And if you design a program and it's all piecemealed and it's not one combined one, it doesn't help the end user when they're out there because they don't want to look at a sheet and go, here's my energy provider, where's my water provider, are they in this particular store, is it a different rebate amount? So it adds a lot of confusion. So we've been very successful over the years working with our energy provider. And we've had third parties manage the program and also as well as the PG&E who manages the program for us right now. And sometimes it is, when in the Bay Area, there are, I think, over 22 water agencies. So sometimes getting everyone to decide on an avoided cost of what we should rebate, it's kind of like herding cats or pushing rope. But if you make us sit in the room long enough, we can come up with an equal number, or excuse me, a number that we all agree upon. So in the end, the ratepayers just know they'll get X amount from the water agencies and X amount from the energy utility. And some of the most recent numbers is that we've recently done, 84,000 as a combined rebate. I know East Bay Month over the years has done over 100,000. The water savings I mentioned in this the last bullet is just shy of 2,000 acre-feet, and that's a pretty good number on the water side. My apologies, I wasn't able to get my act together to get the energy savings, but I know it's a very big number as well. Next slide, please. And another good partnership that we've had with our energy provider is something called the Water Conservation Showcase. We've been having this event for about 10 years, will be 11 years, and if you're interested, we have it on right around World Water Day, which is typically around March 22nd. Our showcase is on a Tuesday, so it's March 25th, and we have supporters from pretty much 14 different water agencies, the U.S. Green Building Council, and of course Pacific Gas and Electric. So they show a lot of interest in understanding that water efficiency means energy efficiency, that they do go hand in hand, and we can both benefit. So this particular event we hold, like I said, it's been 11 years. We have sometimes up to 20 speakers there, up to 50 different booths or water agencies. So it's been a real good combined effort to get the message on out to both of our customers. Next one. And then this particular one, I just happened to be stumbled upon this one today, and it kind of took me back a little bit that PG&E is, I must give them a little shout out here. They're very forward-thinking energy utility, and I saw they got drip irrigation systems and low-pressure sprinkler nozzles. Now, of course, this is for the agricultural industry, but it's a good start. So they see that if they can get people to reduce their pumping from their wells or pressurizing their irrigation systems, that they can actually save quite a bit and be much more beneficial. So like I say, I was really happy to see this, and you can see they'll give up to $22,000. Of course, there's you have to have quite a few acres to be able to get that, but California does grow a lot of things, so we are very moving in the world of efficiency on the agricultural event. Next slide. Now, when we do a lot of programs, before they can become a fixed program, we like to actually get in there and monitor a lot of things. So we do combined evaluation. So this is a particular hotel we're working with. And as I mentioned, commercial food service is very water and energy intensive. So you see the original was a flight type machine and used 3,700 gallons a day. Well, working with the customer hand in hand, which is I think one of the more satisfying things, is that you can often help guide them into, well, you maybe don't need as large of a device. So in this particular case, we're able to say, from what your business is, you can actually step down a little bit. So we were actually able to save them over 3,000 gallons a day, and you can see the flow rate. So you could also see the energy on there too. So what this does is it allows us to do enough of these to go, this is about a right amount to incentivize, because you're always trying to get that sweet spot of enough to get customers to participate, and at the same time to make sure that your payback for your ratepayers as a utility comes back about the same time as the customer will get their money back. Next slide, please. And then on this last one, so I go through some of the savings, and this one happened to be such a incredibly slam dunk on the energy and water savings that the last line there is it was less than a year payback. And as you can see right in the middle there says the cost of operation. So they essentially went from $51,000 a year down to $13,000 a year. And once again, it's saving the water, the energy, the sewer, and also an incentive rebate. So it's a pretty good story for this customer, and also it's good to get these sort of numbers, as I mentioned previously, to help you design like flat rate programs, because it does take a little bit of money and time to go in and put a water meter on the machine, to put different electrical meters on there, so you can actually get this. But all the numbers and things that we like to rebate here with our local energy providers, that we always want to have numbers to be able to back them on up. Something that we can actually be very comfortable about, and knowing that we, if we need to put a little market transformation money in there, we can do that at the beginning, but as the program winds down, we can, adjust accordingly. So I think, Marianne, I think that was my last slide. Oh, yep. And were there any other questions from anybody offhand?
Well, Jeffrey, let's turn it over to you. I think you said there are a few questions for Charles.
Yes, thanks, Marianne. There are 2 questions. I'll just read them in order here. The first one being, are you considering how water savings also reduce costs at wastewater treatment plants, including embedded energy and deferral of increased capacity?
Jeffrey, read that question one more time because I think please.
Sure. Are you considering how water savings also reduce costs at wastewater treatment plants, including embedded energy and deferral of increased capacity?
Yeah, that is actually something we take into consideration. I know for the most part our what we do for savings hasn't had a huge effect on what gets delivered to the wastewater treatment plant because we still deliver a heck of a lot there. I know as I mentioned, our special sanitation district, SD1 as we like to call it, is actually much bigger than what we are actually providing to it these days, and we're actually trying to go out and buy things or buy as much sludge or other items because, as I said, we do have methane generators there, and so we're actually producing energy on the grid now. But as a negative to what's delivered to the wastewater treatment plant, that hasn't been brought to any of our attention in water conservation. And I mentioned about the potential cost savings for the customer. Yeah, we always include that into our return on investment for them, and also potential avoided costs here at the district for operating that plant. So I hope that answered the question to whoever asked it. If it didn't, my apologies.
Thanks, Charles. Second question was, with respect to closed washer rebates, do you account for a machine rebated but perhaps not remaining in the service territory, such as selling a home or moving out of the area?
No, that's a very good question. We do realize that when we rebate a toilet, typically it's bolted down to the floor. When somebody spends $1,000 on a clothes washer and they move, that clothes washer is being taken there with them. So the way we kind of balance it on out is we assume there's an X amount of people also that we're not aware about that are buying these clothes washers, and they're not participating in our program. And we think that number it probably outweighs the amount of customers that leave essentially our service territory, or as we kind of look at it here in California, since I mentioned we got all these different water agencies participating in that program. Hopefully they land in one of our neighboring service territories. And suddenly if California had a mass migration, heck, we might have that after the next earthquake around here, but if that would be the case, there'd be nobody here to use water, so shouldn't be too much of a problem.
Thanks, Charles. Third question that just came in is, do you do joint audits with Pacific? I hope that makes sense. That's exactly how it reads.
With PG&E probably. He probably meant PG&E.
Yeah. No, we definitely, we're pretty fortunate. We've got a really good green business program that's run by the counties that we do combined energy, water, wastewater, solid reduction with the local utilities or handlers of things. If we do have all of the, excuse me for stumbling, we have the names of the representatives from both utilities going each way for gas and electric. So when we are going out to a larger place, so say if we're going to go to a bottling company that's making some sort of sport drink or thing of that nature, we do call the other utility and say, oh, we've got an in, we have a person, we're talking to the facilities engineer, would you like to come along? And oftentimes that's great, because getting to the key decision makers that was mentioned in a couple other slides often is very challenging, and we want to make sure that if we do get that decision-making ability in the room from the customer standpoint, that we want to be able to throw all the potential rebates or incentives or cost savings towards the customer at the same time. So yes, we do.
Okay, thank you very much, Charles. Really appreciate it. We had asked Charles to give us some examples focusing particularly on indoor water efficiency and energy efficiency. And so now we're going to switch gears and move to a water utility, a wholesale water utility on the East Coast. And we've asked Dave Brochure, who is with Tampa Bay Water, to focus more now on the outdoor side, to talk about how water and energy can be a consideration in planning outdoor efficiency programs. So I'll turn it over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Marianne. Good afternoon. I am Dave Brochure with Tampa Bay Water, and I'm going to focus on quantifiable outdoor conservation or efficiency programs from our perspective here in the Southeast, which is obviously a lot different than other parts of the country. Next slide. A little bit of background about Tampa Bay Water. We are a regional water wholesaler. We have 6 member governments and 6 customers. So we sell water to them and they distribute water. 2011, our demand was about 230 million gallons of water a day. Some similar in 2012 and 2013. And those are our 6 member governments in those 3 counties around the Tampa Bay area. We were reorganized back in 1998, and part of the reason was to allow us to focus more on water supply sustainability. About 2.3 million people served potable water in our region. Most of our supplies in 1998 were relatively inexpensive groundwater. The surface water you see there on that chart on the left is for the city of Tampa, who has some of their own supplies. To reduce our reliance on that supply due to environmental issues, we quickly diversified into an integrated system with much more surface water and desalinated seawater from Tampa Bay. Next slide. As you can see from our data, these sources of supply impact our variable cost of water. And you can see a significant driver of those costs is and how and will be how much we operate our regional desalination facility. This type of variable breakdown will help you not only in this exercise, but also in conducting any type of avoided cost analysis on existing sources of supply. So those things really stand out. Groundwater is pretty cheap in the Southeast and in Florida in particular. Surface water is a little bit more expensive, and desal is a lot more expensive. Next slide, please. Part of our reorganization required us to start tracking what it actually is or what's planned to occur in our region. Tampa Bay Water has conservation responsibilities and requirements, but direct implementation of programs is currently not one of them. Obviously a difficult task. So we develop programs our members can use, we fund research, and we track what is actually occurring. From these efforts, we added a greenhouse gas calculator that really focused us on electrical usage and how much can be conserved regionally through reductions associated with potable water conservation. And ultimately, all implementations link back to account data once we get that from our member governments. Next slide, please. So let's look at what we have. Here I'm just going to focus on programs that are being used in our region, and the research indicates they lower potable water use. Potable water use, which is different than all water use. Reclaimed water is included as an alternative water supply, and alternative water supplies offset 100% potable use for irrigation, although they technically may not save water at all. In potable water they do save. Reclaimed water projects have been used due to surface water discharge constraints, and its use was considered an alternative disposable method historically. Each project for reclaimed has a different cost. You know, it could be transmission or distribution costs, so they are kind of project specific. Shallow wells or well point systems have been rebated in our region, and they're basically, here you can see some of the costs. Of course, there are some surface water withdrawals, deep wells, and even cisterns, and we count all those as offsets to potable demands. And our estimated savings rate is about 250 to 300 gallons per account per day for the single family sector. Next slide. Irrigation system evaluations, and in other parts of the country they're called audits, are very popular here. We started this process for our member governments back in the late 1980s, and in this case you can have evaluations without rebates or evaluations with rebates, where you would incentivize the change out of the irrigation system. If you're not familiar, basically the evaluator is looking for problems in the irrigation system, including good coverage, matched coverage, any plant blockage, and uniformity of application, although the uniformity of application and the catch can tests are optional. From a programmatic perspective, the evaluator will do a visual inspection of each irrigation zone, pressure and flow test in all rotor zones, and the catch can test on at least one zone. This is optional in most evaluations done here, as research has indicated uniformity is not really as important as other performance metrics due to lateral water movement in soils. Training is either from the Irrigation Association or in Florida, the Florida Irrigation Society also offers training. Next slide. Here are some more of the specifics. Note that contractors are used in many cases to implement these programs. The evaluation cost is between $150 to $200 for contractors in the single-family sector, and is basically based upon the numbers of zones or square footage. The estimated savings were based on some actual evaluation work done in our region with our water use characteristics. And obviously these would probably be higher further west and in warm and dry climates. And as I will discuss a little bit later, your program should focus mainly on surplus irrigation users and not all users, because some of these numbers were applied to all users, as you'll see in a few minutes. Next slide, please. So what we were able to construct on the other side of this, from the greenhouse gas emissions data, is we were able to construct a method to link the facilities that we have with emissions data. For our system, we get electricity from 3 different sources: Tampa Electric, or TECO, Progress Energy, and then the Withlacoochee Regional Electric Cooperative, and then they buy water, they buy electricity from different sources. And our supply and distribution network is in around a 2,000 square mile area, and therefore we have different facilities in different parts of the Tri-County area. We used a combination of Clean Air Market and eGrid data to actually link emissions with energy use from our facilities, and this is where my results today are actually come from. So the critical thing here is that we had to gather all this data and put our facilities into those locations with all the electrical usage information and the greenhouse gas emission information. Next slide. So before I give you the actual information on our electrical usage, just going to give you a little more information on our historical program results. We identified about 65,000 connections in the reclaimed water, and we said something like 65,000 connections because the number of active connections does fluctuate a bit in our region. We've had a lot of foreclosures in the past, and remember, governments report all their connections. When we look at their billing data, sometimes those connections are not there because people have been foreclosed or their homes are not there. So they do fluctuate a little bit in our region. There are some of these are multifamily and non-residential counts that do have some one-to-one offsets like cooling towers, but generally irrigation is the main use in our region. And as you can see, wells and evaluation come in far second and third. But as far as conserved potable water in our region, outdoor source substitution and some efficiency have made a significant difference. And you can see that obviously we estimated about over 20 million gallons of our savings in the region, potable water savings, are from outdoor potable water offset, and a majority that comes from reclaimed. The total in the region was about 27 million gallons a day from 1996 forward. So let's see what this means from an energy and greenhouse gas perspective. Next slide. So when we look at the numbers from the 3 areas, you'll note in this slide here that TECO and kilowatt hours per million gallons produced has the highest number. Obviously, that's due to the surface water plant and the desal plant being in that area. That's very important. Obviously, if we didn't have a surface water plant or a desal plant, the electrical usage would be much lower there. The Withlacoochee Regional Electric Cooperative area is second because most of our water is moved and repumped to push it into the retail areas, and you can see the average kilowatt hours per million gallons produced in the region. I don't have any acre feet number or 100 cubic feet because I live in the east. So you can also note that on the bottom that in 2012 we estimated our greenhouse gas reductions at about 14,000 tons of CO2 equivalents, with about 10,500 tons coming from those outdoor reductions. Now, from a cost perspective, it cost us about $124 per million gallons of water produced. So annual savings here are about $1.23 million. And from outdoor water use, our energy savings are about $930,000. This is just the wholesaler. So our member governments are still distributing the water, and they have yet to calculate what their energy reductions are from this. So they're significant for us from a regional perspective. Next slide, please. So one of the things that happened at Tampa Bay Water is that in our redevelopment and our reorganization is that we did redevelop a demand management plan that was done back in 1997. In our demand management plan and redevelopment, our board agreed that lowering their cost of our regional water in the future was important, and they didn't want to build capacity when it's not needed. So they passed policy integrating demand management into the supply planning process, which was really critical for us. We also looked at reducing future capital costs and avoided chemical and energy costs. And here you can see the avoided cost evaluation, the supply deferral, what we estimated our capital costs would be for every 1 million gallons of water a day saved, and what our savings were in interest for a $100 million capital project. So if we were doing a 5 million gallon a day project, that would save us about, not doing that project would save us about $5 million in interest. The other thing we looked at was the avoided energy and chemical operating cost. Now, $1,800 per million gallons of energy and chemical expenses were the actual cost in 2011 from our desal plant. So we used that as an avoided cost using the avoided cost tool that the Alliance for Water Efficiency has developed. And we also linked billing data with property appraiser data in our demand management plan, leading us to irrigable area and determination of what were considered surplus and deficit irrigators in our region. Next slide, please. So on this chart and this slide, you can see on the right-hand side, these are the activities that are above the dark line, which were really cost-effective regionally, that were avoided cost was positive for us. And things that stand out, obviously you can see the things that stand out and things that don't stand out. As you can see from the results, soil moisture sensors and ET controllers applied to the top 25% of all of our irrigators, our surplus irrigators, and a $200 rebate provided us with a cost-effective and positive avoided cost implementation. Alternative irrigation sources at the $750 utility level was in the same ballpark. Cooling towers, which is a seasonal use, taking us from 2.5 to 6 cycles of concentration. I wasn't sure whether we should consider this outdoor or not, but all of it occurs outdoors. With about $1,000 incentive, was quite cost-effective at 7 cents per 1,000 gallons. Although irrigation evaluations are cost-effective, overall less than the cost of water, their costs were higher than our avoided cost and fell below the line. The important thing to note here is that research conducted indicated that the programs implemented were not focused on surplus irrigators. This is the irrigation evaluations. And even though there were some savings, in 2/3 of the cases, water use went up. So the thing to note here is that when you do irrigation evaluations, is that you should focus on surplus irrigators. The other thing to note here is that soil moisture sensors in our area, because of deficit irrigation potential, had more potential actually than ET controllers, although we just determined that was a something that the consumer would have to do on their own. Next slide, please. So we did some research on the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program customers as well. This is an environmental horticulture program that we offer. We've been providing funding for about 15 years on that program. Our small data set of actual certified and recognized customers indicated that a vast majority of those early adopters were already deficit irrigators or do not irrigate at all according to the data in which we use minimum month of water use. But they were deficit irrigators by 85%. They deficit irrigated 85% before conversion, so they didn't really use much water at all. But on average, the program still reduced water use by about 12%. So we think that with additional targeting, we can help expand that program in the future and actually focus more on reducing use, similar to what you might be doing in other parts of the country with zero-scape programs. Program targeting, in somewhat related research effort, the University of Florida research evaluated not only the direct impacts of low-impact development on water use, but also avoided greenhouse gas reductions through reductions in lawn and maintenance and fertilizer costs, and I have that presentation at my fingertips. And finally, we have not done this. What we have not done is determine the impacts of increased efficiency in new development on water and energy use. But obviously, programs that reduce new users before they come onto the system, or the new passive water use rate, will also lower future costs for water supply agencies. And then finally, my last slide. So these are kind of my take-home messages. Your next increment of supply, depending upon its source, will be driven by energy and chemical cost. So obviously, you need to know the variable cost of your water supplies. If desalinated water is being proposed, or a long pipeline, and a lot of pumping in mountainous areas, those variable costs of operation are going to be something that needs to be evaluated. And finally, as we deal with increased variability in rainfall and temperatures in your region, outdoor water use will likely bear the brunt of water use changes. Increasing efficiency will be the norm. So please think about this during your evaluations. And that is my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Do we have any specific questions for Dave before we continue? I just have a few closing slides before we open it up for questions. So were there any specific questions for Dave?
Yes, thanks, Marianne. One specific question is, did the utility do all of the cost avoidance savings analysis in-house?
No, we did not. We did use a consultant to do some of that work because you're talking to all the staff of Tampa Bay Water right on the phone. But we did use the Alliance for Water Efficiency's Avoided Cost tool. In doing that, we did put in some of our location-specific background information into that tool, but we did use that tool, and it worked really well for us. So in all of our avoided cost efforts, we used that front-end document, that front-end calculator and tool that the Alliance for Water Efficiency developed. And obviously, our board was rather impressed. We are going forward at this point in time, just tracking passive implementation and whatever other things our member governments are going to be doing. And then we'll come back to our board in a couple of years and see if they want us to actually move forward and start funding some of the implementation of those programs that are on the docket. And clearly, from a cost efficiency perspective, some of our member governments should be looking at those cooling towers.
And just to
question.
I'd just like to add something to what Dave just said. The Alliance for Water Efficiency tracking tool that Dave mentioned is available free of charge to anyone who's an Alliance for Water Efficiency member. And on our webinar page, there should be at least a PowerPoint presentation, if not the actual webinar, where we show the tracking tool, how it calculates avoided costs and how it calculates not only water savings, cost-effective water savings, but energy savings and greenhouse gas emission reduction as well.
Thank you. Just to follow up with Dave, a couple related questions here. What was the rebate structure and values for the irrigation optimization program, and which was more successful, audits alone or audits with rebates?
Well, actually, the member governments were providing, I think, up to $300 or $400 for the rebates. We followed up on that and did some survey work and determined that even with a $500 rebate, that most customers would not, depending upon the cost of how much they were going to spend, they weren't going to accept the rebate. And so the member governments who implemented these programs, the city of Tampa was the only one that really looked at rebates. They didn't actually get many rebate takers in their program. So they've just been doing the irrigation evaluations without the rebates. I will tell you that the savings rates, when we did our follow-up work in evaluating these best management practices, we determined that our member governments were not focusing on these surplus users. They were focusing on deficit irrigators, and so they lost a lot of savings because they were recommending to the deficit irrigators to move back to neutral irrigation, ET0. And so they did not focus on the right users. And so one of our recommendations back to them is to focus only in on neighborhoods or high water users only. So the rebate would have to be significant in order for someone to actually consider taking it.
Were the audits done for residential or ICI properties or both?
The audits or irrigation evaluations were done mostly on residential establishments. In our part of the world, the other larger user of water in our region might be multifamily apartment complexes. In general, majority of them have they generally get their own wells to irrigate. So majority of the focus was on single family. There are some done on multifamily and a few ICI. The savings rates are site specific because of the square footage of irrigable area.
Okay, let's go ahead and finish up the webinar and then address. I know we have some more questions, but I'd like to go ahead and go to the end so that we have questions for all of our speakers. So to just wrap up, Amelia gave a wonderful summary of the process, but I'd like to just sort of repeat a list of what lessons we've learned from this whole project, this whole experience that we've had working on water and energy programs. And so the tips that I just want to conclude with are just a set of steps that you would go through in trying to determine if a water and energy partnership makes sense for you. And the first step is figuring out your embedded energy footprint of water supply and wastewater. And yes, it is a difficult thing to do, but if you sit down with your electric bills and you parse out your electric bills, assign the meters to the proper place in that chain of water supply and wastewater treatment, you'll quickly figure it out. You net out your facility that you basically can figure out at each step in the process where your energy use is going. And that's going to be your first big step to do, because without that information you're not going to be able to focus on the right kind of water and energy partnership for you. Second step is to identify those end uses and customer classes in your service area that will most benefit from water and energy programs. Maybe they'll be in the outdoor sector. Maybe they'll be in the commercial sector. Maybe it'll be leak detection. That was the big surprise that came out of California, that leak detection programs saved the most embedded energy of all of the cold water conservation programs that were tested. So take a look at where your energy use is and where the actual savings might benefit the system the most. Then third step, prepare cost-benefit analyses for both of the perspectives, both water and energy, and seek out the energy utility staff that are in your service area at the various energy utilities that provide electric and gas services, and discuss common areas of benefit and, most importantly, common areas of credit. An energy utility will be a lot more interested in working with you if they can get credit and recognition from their regulator for the work that they're doing with you in a partnership. Fifth step, define cost-sharing opportunities between the utilities and what the management roles would be for joint programs. What part does what utility do? One of the first programs I ever ran in 1989, and I'm almost embarrassed to admit this, was a combined water and energy program, even back in 1989. And I worked with the energy utility there, the electric utility, and we figured out who would do the evaluation, who would do the implementation, who would do the customer outreach, and everybody had an assigned responsibility. And that's part of the roadmap that you have to come up with. Next, develop the implementation timeline. When are you planning to do it, in what months, and in what time frame? And then once you have all of those pieces, then you need to procure any necessary regulatory approvals. It's not so much an issue on the water side, but it is an issue on the energy side. Your energy partners won't want to work with you if they're not getting their public service commissions or public utility commissions to support their effort and give them credit for the energy efficiency that is obtained as a result of the water programs. So that's a step that has to be undertaken, but you have to have the data in hand first about what you would actually be saving and what the project is before you go for it. And then once you're underway, document the barriers and challenges during that implementation process, not only for yourself but for those of us out here later who want to learn from what you've done. And then number 9, most importantly, document your savings, the savings that you've achieved in water, energy sectors, and then, of course, the greenhouse gas emissions you saved as a result of that. Not just document what you thought you would save, what you projected to save, but what you actually did save by taking a look at your metered records. And then lastly, you've saved greenhouse gas emissions. It's been a wonderful success story. Are you tying that back into your local climate change goals? In communities now that are pledging to be climate neutral, these are really important connections to make with the local community. So these are some of the lessons that we've learned from all of the projects that we've looked at over the course of the past year. And with that, I'd like to wrap up the webinar and open up our formal question and answer session. I think you've all figured out now that dialog box is a place for you to type in your questions. I think Jeffrey has a number of them already that we can start with. A PDF of this presentation will be posted on our webinar page. The recorded webinar, once we check to make sure it's worked properly, we will post that as well, but the PDF will be posted almost right away. And the reports that you've heard about, the Conservation Synergy Report and the ACEEE Exemplary Practices Report are also going to be posted in that same section on the webinar page. We have it posted elsewhere on our website, but we'll make it easier for you. So we'll go ahead and put it all in one place so that you have that as a resource. And before I open it up for the questions, I just want to thank again our 4 speakers who did a fabulous job for us today in this webinar. So thank you very much, Rachel, Amelia, Charles, and Dave. And we'll now, Jeffrey, open it up for questions.
Great. Thanks, Marianne. Question asked early on for Rachel. With the Austin program, were the utilities different entities, or were they blanketed under Austin government?
Thanks, Jeffrey. They're separate utilities, but I'm trying to recall if Austin Energy is actually run by the city government. Amelia, do you remember?
Austin Energy is a municipal electric utility.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. I have 3 questions here then that are just kind of to the, any of the presenters. So speak up as you wish. The first one here, have there been any programmatic developments that cover the nexus of water, energy, and climate specific carbon dioxide emissions? Second part to that is, do you see this being something that might be considered in the not too distant future?
I'm not sure I understand the question. This is Marianne, but when you say programmatic requirements, do you mean, is it a regulatory?
Sorry. Programmatic developments. That
programmatic. I'm still not sure I understand the question. Any of you other speakers understand what the question is getting at?
I'm not sure what they mean specifically for utilities, but certainly for the programs that we examine that are run by private entities, a lot of their work is sort of umbrellaed under these climate goals or these goals for environmental sustainability within their companies, and so they do incorporate that climate change component. But it sounded like somebody else had a response as well.
No, I was going to kind of second that, as Charles from East Bay Mud, is that, of course, it's something we record and we submit on an annual basis to our customers of what we're doing as utility for them on that. But I don't, if it's for regulatory, I don't know of anything in California coming down the line. And Marianne, do you know of anything that might be like?
No. I don't, but I know that under the 20 by 2020 legislation in California that this is all being considered. The water and energy connection is being considered as part of the compliance with AB 32. But I'm not sure that's what the question was. So perhaps the person who was asking it can type a little bit more, and we can, in the meantime, move on to another question and then come back to this one if we didn't answer it.
Okay, next question is, do any of the presenters have suggestions on how to approach the difficulty in sharing customer data between utilities for joint programs?
Well, actually, Tampa Bay Water actually collects utility billing information from all 6 of our member governments, and only one of our member governments was actually concerned about enough to eliminate the name of the customer on the bill. But clearly, if you have the billing data and you have the parcel data along with the billing data, you can link the two back together. We have sunshine law requirements in Florida, so we have been very cognizant of our member governments because we know that the flow of data will be gone if we don't. We're not careful of what we apply. So when we have a request, an information request, we pass it back to our member governments to have them provide that information back to the public.
Were the energy utilities able to link to your water data?
They haven't as of yet. So would they be able to? Well, we would get approval from our member governments to do that first. But clearly this is kind of one of those questions. All the data is a kind of a public access, is public information. The format that the utility provides that information out to the public is probably the issue on how they provide that for a specific customer. But if someone asks just for information or asks our member government for specific information on a specific customer, they would have to give it underneath these sunshine law requirements in the state of Florida.
And this is Amelia. I'll just add that if you look to the MOU, or sorry, the Inter-Utility Agreement that's in the Pacific Institute report, that will maybe help to give you an idea of how customer privacy can be protected through sort of the legal mechanism between the utilities. And I've also heard that utilities who have collaborated on audit programs, say for commercial, in the commercial sector, sometimes there would be a release form, and they would just, the customer would just sort of sign the form saying, yes, this energy utility can share the information with the water utility.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'll just move on to the next question then. Are any of the presenters familiar with PACE, P-A-C-E, financing and its relative success in funding water energy efficiency projects, working with or without utilities?
Actually, in Florida, we did a paper on PACE, a kind of a white paper describing how the property assessed clean energy programs work. I think there's some significant programming in Sonoma County in California that actually kind of identified the potential there. Our city of Tampa actually evaluated that in front of their city council. But one of the things that they found from the PACE perspective is that if you're going to save water, you obviously have to save energy. Energy is the first thing, and you can save water through the energy. And you can add local exemptions onto that. There are some significant PACE programs in Florida and different parts of Florida. But I think the financing part of it was the part that there were some issues about the cost of the money that they were actually going to borrow, and so people would be getting credit on. PACE programs allow the work to the property appraisers, so when someone has non-ad valorem, they have non-ad valorem taxing power to put this assessment on a person's property, a commercial property, to allow that property to get these finances to increase the value of their property through energy efficiency and secondarily through water efficiency, and then that assessment remains there for a certain period of time. Even though they can sell the property, that assessment would remain with the property. So it's kind of in its infancy in the East, but there are opportunities in Florida that have been undertaken. I haven't heard a lot about successful implementation yet.
And Dave, this is Charles in East Bay Mud, and we are looking at the program ourselves right now actively. I know it's unbuilt financing is something that we have been kind of looking at for quite some time. Is the next little area for kind of revolving funds for utilities to, and we are familiar with the PACE program, and I'm not as directly associated with what our evaluation is at this particular point in time, but just say, yeah, we are familiar with it and we are reviewing it.
Thank you very much. The next questions I have are directed toward Dave Brochure at Tampa Bay Water. And this person writes that they applaud Tampa Bay Water on calculating greenhouse gas savings. Are you similarly calculating greenhouse gas emission savings from water end uses?
We only calculated, we did calculate the energy savings associated with greenhouse gas, the energy savings associated with hot water use. So that is in our calculator. So those are end uses. Yes. All the hot water savings are being calculated as well.
Thank you. This might also be just today, but maybe not. As far as energy use associated with end uses of water, the data they found is from a Pacific Institute report, Next Million Acre Feet report. Is anyone aware of additional research in that area?
We just worked on a study with the University of South Florida. It's called the feasibility study on model development to estimate and minimize greenhouse gas concentrations and carbon footprint of water reuse and desal facilities. And that report's going to be coming out. It's a Water Reuse Research Foundation project that actually estimates what greenhouse gas emissions and potential reductions would be due to reuse. And so I think they were charged with looking at how much energy would be saved by reuse versus desal facilities. And so it's basically the energy intensity of those two sources of supply.
Also, our water conservation tracking tool that tracks greenhouse gas emission reductions tracks them down to the end use level for specific conservation programs. So yes, the tracking tool will tell you with a toilet replacement program for that end use what the greenhouse gas emission reductions are for that cold water conservation intervention. So that is an end use analysis of sorts.
Just to follow up on what we did, because someone asked a question about hot water reductions, the river network actually did write a report on energy use and energy footprints, and some of our calculations for hot water reductions came from some of the residential end use study work that was done by Aquacraft, and that was integrated into the river network research. So there is some research from the river network on that as well.
And that is posted on our website on our water and energy page. It's called The Carbon Footprint of Water, that report.
Great, thank you. There are actually no new questions.
Well, I think we're at our 90-minute period, so thanks to all of you who hung with us the full 90 minutes. We debated whether or not to make this webinar that long, but we had a number of great stories to tell, and we thought it would be of interest to you, and I can see the fact that you've hung with us means you agree. So thank you very much for participating in this webinar. We will post the information within a day or two, so look to our website. The webinar page is part of our resource library, so check it out. And watch for our webinars in 2014. This will be the last one we'll do this year, but we'll do a series of them on water efficiency topics in 2014. And lastly, I just want to conclude again by thanking our fabulous speakers who made this webinar today a success. So thank you very, very much. And thank you all for participating.